The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host, guest, random reptoid, or chupacabra may not necessarily reflect those of AM 950 Radio, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Now, it's time to step into the unknown. There are things people experience but never talk about. A shadow moving in the corner, flickering of the lights, a disembodied voice. We invite you to talk with us. Share your story, share your experience, because this isn't just your story, this is our story. This is GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.
And this is GhostBox Radio on AM 950, where every night we talk about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. My name is Greg Bakun. Thank you very much for joining me on this kind of a special anniversary night, actually. And this is one of those situations, I think, where things just kind of align appropriately. So first off, the anniversary here is, today is the 55th anniversary of the moon landing, okay? As our guest is going to tell us tonight, is it? That's kind of the question that we are going to be talking about tonight. We're having this fantastic conversation with author Craig Fraley. Craig wrote the book called Why There's Doubt, Moon Landings. And the purpose of the book is to talk about did it happen or not, and get as much evidence together as possible to put it together for people to make up their own mind about it. We did try to have Craig on before, and I do apologize. I seem to have had some sort of technical issue on my end, and that was when my Facebook was down and stuff. So we had to cut our conversation short with Craig even before we got anywhere with it. So Craig, welcome to GhostBox Radio. Thank you for being so flexible and actually making yourself available on the anniversary.
No, I think it's great. This is the perfect night for it. So it all worked out.
It did. And that's kind of the thing, right? Is one of those things where sometimes, things fall into place when it looked like that they weren't going to do so. And maybe that's the same thing that could be said about the moon landing. I don't know. And that's the thing that, my whole life, and I can't obviously, I'm 50. So I can't exactly be like, well, I remember from the time I was 0 to whatever age that the people were thinking the moon landing was fake. But, when you're at a young enough age still, there is, that's something that still kind of perpetuates along. And, so it's like one of those things that seems to have always been with me my whole life, that the moon landing, that there was some doubt whether or not it was real or not.
Yeah, and for me, I grew up believing that we landed on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're taught in school. You've seen the videos, you hear the astronauts talk about it. And when I was a kid, there was a guy on the Mike Douglas show, which was a talk show. It was popular when I was a kid. And this guy's on there and he's saying we didn't go to the moon. And he had photographic evidence showing why we didn't. And I remember watching that episode as a kid, walking away from it going, there's no way that can be true. But then again, the stuff he was showing was pretty compelling. And so that, like you, it just stays with you in the back of your mind. Yeah. And years ago, we were having dinner with some friends. One was from Germany. And he said, nobody at home thinks you guys went to the moon. And I'm thinking, wow, really? And then so I started thinking about it. And there's millions and millions of people all over the world that don't believe we went to the moon. So where I came from this was, I'm not coming up from that we did or we didn't. I was very curious about why people were so committed into believing we did not, and what evidence do they cite to back up why they believe that. And then I'll just show this real quick so you can see the cover, because that picture plays a part in a little bit on the book. And so, yeah, we can just get into this conversation. And one thing I want to say before we get into it is that nothing in this book I invented. Everything in this book is researched. You can find this yourself. You can find it in books and documentaries, YouTube. You can find it everywhere. And barely scratching the surface on any of these topics. You can go as far down the rabbit hole as you want on any one of these topics. So I'm not the expert, but I quoted, and I've got some stuff here from the experts that I'm going to refer to as we do this.
And I do want to just point out that if you want to be like me and pick up the book, Why There's Doubt, Moon Landings, it's available on Amazon. And I mean, mine doesn't come with all the post-it notes that you have in your book.
Yeah.
Holy cow. I mean,
But you know what?
you came loaded for
Everything-
this thing. It's only an hour show. I
did.
just want to make sure you know that. Okay.
Oh, I know. But the thing is I want to make sure that I have all the highlights where I can find them, where we can talk about it. And everything that's on these post-it notes, whether are in the book. So when you get the book, you got all this information.
And I'm going to tell you also, I mean, my plan is not to let those post-it notes go to waste. I mean, whatever we don't get through tonight, I would be more than welcome to keep, if you're up for it, to keep the conversation going on it. It's such a fascinating topic in general.
It is.
Let me ask you this, what was the attitude at the time of the space race, around the time to get the moon landing going? What was that the United States was really pushing for this?
It was fear and patriotism. Because remember, in 1957, Russia launched the first satellite in space, Sputnik. And it scared the heck out of a lot of Americans because their fear was that the Russians are now going to have the ability to drop nuclear weapons from these satellites over North America. So this spawned, and now a lot of people believe that that's what started the space race. Mm-hmm. Let's back it up. A lot of people also believe that it started when Kennedy gave his famous speech that we're going to send a man to the moon in this decade and bring it back to that. And by the way, his speech is written verbatim in this book. So you get every word of his speech is in here. But the space race actually started before that. It started in the last days of World War II, because when the Russians and the Americans, when they were going through Germany and winning the war, and they came across what the Germans were doing with rocket technology, it shocked them. I mean, it shocked the Russians and it shocked the Americans, because the Germans were so far advanced in rocket technology and in their ballistic missiles that we weren't even doing anything like that. So the race began to capture the Russian scientists. The Russians wanted them and we wanted them. And so they almost got divvied up. And it was basically who could get away from the Russians fast enough to surrender to the Americans. And the Russians were ahead of us in a lot of these things. So they got a good bunch of the scientists. And then during a program called Operation Paperclip, we gathered up a bunch of scientists and we brought them to the United States to start working on rocket technology. So that was the beginning of the space race, was the end of World War II.
And I find it, I tried to kind of talk about this the last time we had you on. The thing that still kind of surprises me a little bit is kind of the celebrityism, if you will, of Wernher von Braun being brought over. Wasn't he the head of the rocket group in Germany?
Yes, he was the crown jewel in all the scientists that we were able to bring over. And he's a fascinating man. Now, von Braun was born into nobility. His mother had nobility on both sides. So he was born with the title of Baron when he was born.
Oh, wow.
And he was a brilliant child. He was very good. He learned to play the cello. He learned to play the piano at a very young age. He could play Bach. He could play Beethoven from memory. A few of his original compositions still exist. But his passion, ever since he was just a very young boy, was going to the moon. It is something that, for some reason, that's what he was driven to do. He studied mathematics. He studied physics. This was his life passion. And when he was 13, he put a bunch of fireworks into the back of a wagon. He was trying to make a rocket-propelled car. All he did was blow the wagon up, scared a lot of people. He was taken into custody and released back to his parents. But so he'd been doing this his whole life. Yeah. And then what happens is he goes to school, and he's going to school for physics, and he's learning liquid fuel rocket technology. And then he graduates with a degree in physics, but then the Nazis come to power and they make it illegal for a civilian to work on rocket technology. So he has a choice. He can give up his life passion and go into some other field, or he could become a member of the Nazi party and continue working on the rocket technology. And he struggled with this. And he talked to his superiors in where he was working, and they said, look, if you want to keep working on rockets, you've got to join the Nazi party. So he does, and he does it reluctantly. Now, Himmler is getting bigger and bigger up in the Nazi party, and he's starting to get interested in all this rocket stuff. And he basically demands that von Braun join the SS. Now, von Braun does not want to do that. And again, his superiors say, look, if you don't join it, you're going to be out of a job. So he joins it. Now, he's get promoted throughout the SS a couple of times. And these are just promotions he received in the mail. There's no evidence to show that he ever participated in any of the political activities of either the Nazis or the SS. He just was doing this because he had to do it. He'd wear the swastika on his uniform when it was advantageous for him to show support, but he was never actively involved in any of the political process. Now, a very interesting man, because now he becomes a head of Mittelwerk, which is where they built rockets during World War II. And Hitler is wanting to make these into all weapons. Now, von Braun always states his goal was only to make something that could go to the moon. But they packed them with warheads and explosives, and they shot him over London. So some people view von Braun as a war criminal, not because of the rockets that went over to London and killed innocent civilians. The reason is because the plant where they built these rockets, more prisoners died making the rockets than were killed by their use of them, because the conditions were horrific. So von Braun comes under scrutiny for this, and he testifies, and he has witnesses on his behalf to testify to him after the war, that he was appalled by these conditions. He tried to interject, and he was quickly told, if you don't mind your own business, you'll end up in the same striped pajamas as the people making the rockets. And then another person, and it's quoted in the book, the article is from the Huntsville Times, and he was asked if he could have intervened in that, and the quote was, and this gentleman who worked with him, Conrad Donnenberg, he said, if he had done it, in my opinion, he would have been shot on the spot. Yeah. So he has to just build these rockets, is what he's doing. And I'm not saying he was a good guy or a bad guy, but now here's what's really interesting. The war's ending. The Russians are coming fast. He does not want to be captured by the Russians because he knows how they treat the prisoners of war. He wants to surrender to the Americans. And there's this harrowing event that happens where he ends up breaking his collarbone in his arm, getting away. And so he can get to the place where he can be, surrendered to the Americans. So the Americans get him. What the Americans do, once they realize who they've got, they bring him over in Operation Paperclip. They don't tell the Americans that they have him for many, many months later. But in the meantime, they expunge his Nazi record. And they basically give him a path to citizenship, and now he's working on the American rocket program. Now, that's 1945. Only 10 years later, in 1955, guess what his title is? He is the technical advisor for Walt Disney Studios.
That's right.
So he's working for Walt Disney Studios, making space films to help promote space exploration to the American people. This is going to be very expensive. It's going to require everybody on board. So they're doing everything they can to start prepping the groundwork to get people excited about us going to the moon. So from there, he of course goes to NASA, becomes the head of the rocket department at NASA, and building the Saturn V. The Saturn V rocket launched, and I've got it here, I don't want to miss anything up. Apollo 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17 landed on the moon. Everybody walked around, played golf, rode cars, did all the stuff they did there, and then came back safely with the Saturn V rocket. And we'll get more into the Saturn V rocket in just a little bit. But now, the Saturn V rocket was developed based on the rockets he was shooting into London from Germany, which were called V2 rockets, and the V stood for vengeance, a vengeance weapon. So that brings us up for von Braun, how he got over here to be a part of NASA.
Wow. And, it's interesting, too. I mean, I'm sure there's no correlation, but Saturn V would have been a Roman numeral V.
Yes.
Is
that something?
It's crazy. And I don't want to take us too far off topic, but, one of the things I read about, too, about like, that he is working with Disney and stuff, that one of the things I see crop up is the fact that people believe that Disney Studios had a hand in the creation of the footage being shot for the fake moon landing. You know what I mean?
That, I haven't come across that, but we'll get into Stanley Kubrick in a little bit.
Yeah,
and
that was all
most
part of it
people
too.
believe that. Yeah, and I'm sure that Disney helped with some of that as well. They had the facilities, they had the money, they had the technology to do that.
It's absolutely unbelievable, and there's so many rabbit holes to go down here. Why don't we do this? First of all, once again, we're talking with Craig Fraley. We're talking about Why There's Doubt: Moon Landings. It's available on Amazon. Please go check it out. I've read the book. I'm enjoying everything about it. I love your take on it. But why don't we go ahead and do this? Let's take our first break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation about why there is doubt with the moon landing, plus, anything else. And there's so many places to go. I don't even know where we're going to go. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. Greg Bakun here. I love historic tours of Minneapolis and seeing everything it has to offer. But if you know me, I like to include a little spooky in my tours, which is why I found the perfect combination. Minneapolis Trolley Tours does this amazing candlelight ghost tour that you have to check out. It's an extremely immersive experience. It's a trolley trip that starts out at a haunted mansion, traveling around Minneapolis locations exposing ghost stories that the public and business owners would rather left untold. Then a tour of the aforementioned haunted mansion where ghosts of past residents from the 1800s reside, plus a lot of surprises to discover. Next, experience Gertrude's After Hours. Did I mention Gertrude is the mansion's most famous ghost? Maybe she'll show up. And you finish up the tour at Gertrude's Lounge in the haunted basement of the mansion with refreshments and Q&A. The trolleys are climate controlled and the mansion is restored to perfection. Check out MinneapolisTrolleyTours.com for more information. Greg Bakun here. I've told you about the out-of-the-world roast beef sandwiches at Maverick's Real Roast Beef, but I haven't told you about their Philly steak sandwiches, turkey bacon avocado sandwich, BLT, crispy chicken, fish sandwiches, brisket, or pulled pork. Okay, you get the idea. They make a lot of delicious food to the same standard as their famous roast beef sandwiches, and now I'm starving. I'm going to go to Maverick's Real Roast Beef off Lexington and Roseville, and you need to go too. Check out their menu at mavericksbeef.com. What you wear is important. It should be fun, creative, and expressive of your own personality. At Grady Gear Company, we believe that clothing is more than just fabric and threads. It's a form of self-expression and a way to stand out from the crowd. Grady Gear is more than just a clothing brand. We're a community. We're here to inspire and motivate you to embrace your true self. We are a locally owned small business who do custom clothing orders too. Find us at GradyGearCompany.com. Have you ever met someone who not only can help you on a deep spiritual level, but also potentially change your life? Refined Divine is an extremely gifted psychic medium who travels the nation and lives right here in the Midwest. And she offers mediumship, mentorship, house and business parties, energy healing, palm readings, and so much more. Refined Divine has helped thousands, and she can help you.
Hi, this is Psychic Medium Deb. I cannot wait to hear from you. You can go to refineddivinepsychic.com.
And welcome back to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. My name is Greg Bakun. It is the anniversary, the 55th anniversary of the moon landing from 1969. But is it? And that's what we're talking about tonight. I'm very happy to have author Craig Fraley with us as we're talking about his book, Why There's Doubt: Moon Landings. It's a fantastic book where Craig has culminated all of this information, and not to tell you one way or the other whether or not the moon landing's fake or not, but what do you think? Here's information on both sides of it. Why people think it's fake, why people don't think it's fake, and I think that's such a fantastic way to get a book out there, because I love the fact that something like this, I think it does require people to kind of make up their own minds, Craig. It just feels like to make a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, and somebody had a good quote, and I can't remember, and somebody told me this, and they said basically what they believe with the moon landings is that technology finally caught up to the lie.
Yeah.
And that's really, and because science doesn't lie, math doesn't lie. You can't, 2 and 2 is 4. Radiation is real, gravity is real. There's certain things that are real that you can't spin any other way. And let's talk about that next, the Van Allen belts. A lot of people may not even know what that is.
I think that's a great way to go. Thank you.
You got it. So now remember 1958, the Russian had already launched Sputnik. Now, here's some firsts the Russians had. They were the first to launch a man in space. They were the first to have a man do a spacewalk in space. They were the first to launch an animal in space. They were the first to launch a satellite in space. They were the first to launch 2 orbiting bodies at the same time in space. And after we even landed on the moon, they were the first to land a lunar rover on the moon, a remote controlled one. Mm-hmm. So in spite of all these firsts in our technology at this time, we were blowing rockets up. We were trying to get them to go up, and they kept falling over and blowing up on the pad. You can go and look this up yourself.
Yeah.
So in the face of all of this going on, Kennedy comes out and says, we're going to the moon in 10 years, and we're gonna, and then NASA's like, crap, how in the hell are we going to do that?
Right, I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah, so now it's on them to make this work. So, because Kennedy's right now, he's getting all this money funded. He's getting Congress to approve all these hundreds of millions of dollars to make this happen. And there's a man by the name of Van Allen, Dr. James Van Allen, and he is working for NASA, and he has to determine, well, how much radiation is there in space? Because we're going to have to send people through that. So he sends up a little satellite. It's called the Explorer 1, and he later sends up an Explorer 2 to measure the radiation. Now, here's what they find. They find that we have 2 orbiting bands of radiation going around like a donut around the Earth.
Got it.
And these here, see, the belt is made up of highly energetic protons. These energies exceed 30 million electronic volts, and the intensity of these protons is 20,000 particles per second, crossing a spherical area of 1 square centimeter in all directions. There's no getting away from it. And we'll get into how deadly radiation is in just a little bit. So he sees that we've got these 2 bands of radiation, and they go from 8,000 miles above the Earth to 38,000 miles above the Earth. So we're going to have to somehow get through that. So Van Allen calls this a deadly sea of radiation. And then one of the things he says, I'm going to find this. So he says, so far, the most interesting and least expected result of man's exploration of the immediate vicinity of the Earth is the discovery that our planet is ringed by a region, to be exact, 2 regions of highly energized radiation extending many thousands of miles into space. This discovery, of course, is troubling to astronauts. Somehow the human body will have to be shielded from this radiation. And he says, even on a rapid transit through the belts. That's important. Yeah. He says, even on a rapid transit through the belts. So they discover that we got all this radiation. And what are we going to do is he goes out and he talks to the American Rocket Society in July 1962, because between 58 and 62, they haven't figured out how we're going to get through the radiation. They said the best protector of radiation is lead, because how dense lead is.
Sure.
And, like when you go to get your x-ray for a tooth, they put a lead shield on you.
Yep.
And so they would have to put so much lead around the Saturn V where the astronauts are contained. There would be there's never been a rocket invented that could get that much payload out of orbit.
Could be too heavy.
In an orbit. Way too heavy.
Way too heavy, yeah.
So in July of 1962, Dr. Van Allen, he addresses the American Rocket Society on radiation and the Apollo mission. And he says his solution would be to detonate a nuclear bomb in the belts. Basically, that bomb would scatter all the electrons, make a hole for the astronauts to go through. So NASA denies that they ever did anything like that. However, coincidentally, in July of 1962, our military detonated it was a 1.5 megaton thermonuclear device. They called it Project Starfish. You can look this up.
Mm-hmm.
And they blew it up in the portion of the Van Allen belts. And here's what happened. Did they blow a hole in the radiation? No. They created a 3rd ring of radiation, 25 times more lethal than the Van Allen belts.
Oh my God.
and when I first read this, it kind of made me mad, even though, I was born in 62, so I was born when this happened. But when these scientists did this, and I read one article, some of them weren't even sure if they were going to catch the atmosphere on fire, but they did it anyway.
They didn't care.
And no, and it just amazes me people can be allowed to do this kind of thing. So now they've got 3 deadly bands of radiation. So we didn't fix it. We made it worse.
Yep. Sounds about right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then it knocked out satellites. There were several satellites that just stopped working. They were in orbit. And so that's what happened there. So now we still are going to send these men through radiation. Now, how dangerous is radiation to the human body? So I've got this on here. The following is from space.com. Radiation in space takes the form of subatomic particles from the sun, as well as sources from the Milky Way, galaxy, and beyond. These high-speed particles tear through DNA molecules, splitting them, damaging their instructions that they have encoded for cell reproduction. The damage can lead to cancers and all sorts of other diseases. So radiation is extremely dangerous. And then the following was a quote from Peter Dedon. He's a member of MIT's Radiation Protection Committee. He said, what happens in the molecules of radioactive elements undergoes decay, emits high energy particles. If you stand in the way of those particles, they're going to interact with the cells in your body. You literally get particle and energy packet moving through your cells and tissue. And like one physicist said, when this little bit of radiation hits you, it tears through your cells like a cannonball. It leaves damage when it does so. So what was there? And then there's a whole thing in here about sieverts and just how much you can get and how sick you can get. I mean, when you go to an x-ray machine, you get 0.000.5 milliliters of a sievert. Very, very little.
Yep.
But even then, they put that lead shield on you and the technician walks out of the room. So imagine what you could get if you were going through the Van Allen belt. So when NASA's answer, when asked, how did the astronauts survive the Van Allen belt? Remember, they did this, 6 times?
Yep.
Up and back. You got to go through it twice.
Right.
They said, and I'm not kidding, they said they went through it really fast. That's their answer. They went through it so fast that it had little to no damage. Now, here's another researcher put it in a good analogy. He goes, that's just like saying you're going to go from one end of the swimming pool to the other. You can either swim or you can swim really fast. Either way, you're going to get equally as wet. Right. And unlike radiation, you can wipe water off with a towel. You cannot do that with radiation. That damage is real. And keep this in mind. No space program other than Apollo, no space program from America, Russia, China, anybody involved in space programs, no one has ever sent a human being through the Van Allen radiation belts. Every shuttle, the International Space Station, are hundreds of miles below the radiation belt. And even those people that are in the space shuttles, when they're hundreds of miles below, they close their eyes and they can see particles shooting all through their eyelids. That's radiation. And they're hundreds of miles below the radiation belt. So that's just interesting. Now, so when I'm researching this and I'm thinking, okay, I understand why people are having some doubt about just Mark Durante is an Italian physicist. He called the radiation belt a showstopper. He said all the other stuff that people call conspiracies, he goes, you can just stop talking about all that. Because if you can't get through the belts, none of it matters. But there's a lot that shows up. So anyway, in the book, it breaks down what this does to your body and how dangerous it is. And they built, and the thing is, because of the weight restriction to get this Saturn V rocket, to get these guys through orbit and everything they said it was going to do, they had to make the weight restrictions very, very light. So there is 0 lead on this Saturn V rocket or the lunar module that they lived in while they were on the moon. And Bill Wood, he's a scientist with degrees in mathematics and physics and chemistry. He's also a space rocket propulsion engineer. He held high security clearances for several top secret projects, such as McDonnell Douglas, who also worked on the Saturn V rocket. During the Apollo missions, he worked at Goldstone Communications. And he said the Apollo capsule was made unusually thin to keep the weight down. They couldn't even carry enough air to be equivalent to sea level air pressure. They ran at reduced pressures to make the walls thinner. The LEM, that's the lunar module they're going to land on, had almost no protection against radiation. The size of the ship they would need to deal with radiation would be so massive, it wouldn't have made the weight requirement for the Saturn V to get out of orbit. So NASA decided the way they would attack this problem is just to say that the radiation was okay. Just ignore the problem.
And I am no scientist, but basically what you just said, it's impossible.
It's impossible. And keep in mind, if it was, and here's another thing that I question.
Yeah.
If it wasn't impossible, and keep in mind the Russians beat us, and I only listed a few. They beat us in 22 firsts in the space race.
Mm-hmm.
And because they were the first to put a satellite in space, did we quit? No. They were the first to put a man in orbit. Did we not try that? No, we did. We were behind them every time, but we didn't stop trying.
Yeah.
So the first we make, where we land a man on the moon, they just quit. That makes no sense. It makes no. Of course, they would have landed a man on the moon. Of course, they would have planted their own flag. Of course, they would have said, "We've done this." We may have come in second, but we're here. There's no way they would have stopped. What stopped them? A lot of people say what stopped them was the Van Allen radiation belts.
Like
because you can't get there.
And just to be clear, folks, if you buy this book, it's not just one page saying it's because of the Van Allen belt, and there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more to it than that. But I mean, that is incredible. And it defies any sort of explanation. And to your point, because it's like you think about it. I mean, to the layperson such as myself who doesn't know anything about anything, I'm going to be like, you go into space, you go into space. So the first man in space from Russia, it's just like that. To me, that's no different than going to the moon. And you would have to think that's what NASA and the government kind of play off of, is people like me who's not questioning. We just take it at face value.
They don't want people questioning at all. In fact, there's one researcher, he went to a spokesman to NASA with some of the photographic evidence we're going to get into in a minute. And he said, this is just claptrap pseudoscience. And if you find any evidence that NASA, you don't bring it to NASA. That was his response.
Right.
So NASA does not want to be questioned about this. They don't want to have a conversation about this at all. I want to bring up one more thing about the Van Allen belts. And now there's a scientist. He works for what's called the Orion Project. This was in 2017. And they were working on a program to get men to go back to the moon as a waypoint to go to Mars. So, and you can see this interview on YouTube, by the way. You can see this. So here's engineer Kelly Smith, and here's what he says. As we get farther away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this can harm guidance systems, onboard computers, other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once on the way up, once on the way back. But Orion has protection, shielding to be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through this wave of radiation. Sensors on board will record radiation levels for scientists to study. And here's the big quote. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. This is NASA in 2017 saying we must solve these challenges before we send people through. And my next question is, what do you mean solve it? Didn't you solve it? You sent people through it 6 times.
Yeah, starting in 1969.
So 1960. Didn't you solve all of those problems? You would have had to have solved those problems in order for the Apollo to have worked. But here's NASA saying in 2017, we're still working on it and we still haven't solved the problem. So, like I said, this kid, I call him a kid because I'm probably older than he is. I don't think he was born when the first Apollo mission took place. So he's not part of what happened with Apollo. In fact, very few people are. And we'll get back to that when we talk about compartmentalization. But so I just find it's fascinating to hear this guy for NASA saying that we haven't figured this out yet. Years, and that was like what, 30 years after we had already gone. That's just unbelievable. It's
like you folks aren't following your own story. Quite honestly,
and here's another one that's really interesting. There was an Apollo 12 astronaut, Alan Bean. Okay, now he walked on the moon. He was asked what effects the radiation belt had on him in a documentary. Here's his reply. I'm not sure we went far enough out to encounter the Van Allen belt.
What?
How can an astronaut who walked on the moon not know that he went through that belt twice?
We took the route.
And that's his quote.
We took the route that where the Van Allen belt goes around the moon as well, so we didn't have to worry about it.
You know what? If in NASA now, they'd probably think, "God, we should have thought of that."
They would have they definitely would have silenced him. Craig, why don't we go ahead and do this? Let's take our next break. When we come back, I want to get into the photographs a little bit. We're rapidly running out of time. We haven't really got into a lot of stuff because there's so many good things to talk about here.
There is.
We're gonna get into more. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950.
Reach your highest level of consciousness and well-being with MetamorphosisConnections.com. MetamorphosisConnections.com is an online directory of the best holistic and metaphysical practitioners to help you make your most informed choices. You can search MetamorphosisConnections.com for classes, events, wellness and life coaches, plus metaphysical products and shops. You can also search for a wide array of healers from all modalities, including EFT, sound healing, energy healing, light therapy, ancestral healing, shamanic healing, reflexology, past life regressions, hypnotherapy, yoga, and more. And if you're not sure where to start, the search feature on MetamorphosisConnections.com is tailored to help both those who know what they are looking for and those who are just starting. Come explore the possibilities for your higher self by visiting MetamorphosisConnections.com. Their experienced practitioners can guide both beginners and those that are already on their spiritual journey. That's MetamorphosisConnection.com, your link to direct you on your spiritual transformation.
Lilliput in Coon Rapids dares you to take part in their Haunted Mansion escape room. 100 years ago, a family suffered a tragic incident. Your team is brought in to find out what happened that night, find proof of the supernatural, and help the spirits find peace. Are you up for the task? This incredible escape room is filling up fast, so book now. Also, a perfect outing for work team building. Go to lilliput.net now to book your experience today. Greg Bakun here. Like many of you, I still collect physical books, and not just any books, but books about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. I go to Megas Books and Herbs, located in the Arts District of Minneapolis, but books are only part of it. Megas Books and Herbs offers crystals, jewelry, herbs, oils, and consultations on how to use this stuff. Check out their in-store classes and events too. This place has everything to expand your horizons. Located at 1848 Central Avenue, Minneapolis, or visit megasbooks.com.
This is Chad, owner of AM 950. Recently, I had a large order of custom designed t-shirts that needed to be turned around in a hurry. I knew exactly who to call. Grady Gear Company. Grady Gear Company is a local company that handles large and small custom clothing and apparel orders. I had a lot of questions from color, shirt quality, and what sizes we needed. Grady Gear Company was great to work with. They got us what we needed on time, and now everybody's looking great around the station in their new gear. Start your order at GradyGearCo.com.
Greg Bakun here. Like you, I love good, fresh, delicious food. So I want to tell you about this treasure in Roseville called Maverick's Real Roast Beef. Maverick's has the best roast beef sandwiches I've ever had. Made fresh every order. Add fries or onion rings dropped in the fryer when ordered, and you have a winning combination. Maverick's Real Roast Beef has a lot more than roast beef, so check out their website, mavericksbeef.com, or check out their restaurant on Lexington in Roseville. And join me tomorrow on GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. We are going to have on Casey Constant. She does past life regressions, and she's going to talk to us about how that works, maybe some examples of people who are able to validate when they went through the past life regression, what they found doing research afterwards that validates the past life regression. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. That is tomorrow. Speaking of fantastic conversations, we are talking with author Craig Fraley. We are talking about why there's doubt, moon landings. We've been talking about, here's the thing. Your book, Craig, is, I'm trying to get the page count here. It's 230 pages. We've talked about two things so far, and one of them wasn't even about the moon landing, but very good background information. So, folks, we are talking off break here, and we know that we're going to bring Craig back to talk more about stuff, and we're going to head into photographs now, right?
Absolutely. We'll talk about that. So Apollo, they were issued two Hasselblad 500 EL cameras. They only used one of them. And the thing is, these were operated with two ordinary D batteries. And the batteries advanced the film. So we'll get to that. Now the film, it was 35 feet of 70 millimeter Kodak film. and it could take 150 photographs. So that's what one cartridge of film would do. So the viewfinder was removed because they're wearing this bulky spacesuit, so they can't like hold up the viewfinder. So they anchored the camera to their chest, and they would operate with these big, bulky, pressurized gloves, which there's some video evidence video evidence that shows that their gloves weren't pressurized at all, which would have been impossible. And they could just click, is point and click.
Right.
Yet they get shots that are studio perfect.
Right.
And I don't even know if they had any shots that didn't come out. So anyway, here's what was amazing is this, and I'm going to hold up just for you to see. You'll have to get it in Life magazine. Now you can't see it right there, but the cover of the cover of National Geographic has the most iconic photo of Buzz Aldrin standing on the moon, and you can see in his reflective of his visor, Neil Armstrong, taking the picture, and there's the American flag. It's all, and he's standing in a spotlight. Which is impossible because they didn't bring a secondary light source to the moon. So they went to Jan Lundberg. He's the photographic expert, and he was the space project's manager for Hasselblad from 66 to 75. And he was the person who modified the cameras for the Apollo mission. He was asked, and you can see this interview yourself. It's in a documentary called What Happened on the Moon. He was asked about the iconic image of Buzz Aldrin. And he said, is he standing in a spotlight? And Lundberg looks at the picture and he goes, yes, it seems like he's standing in a spotlight. I can't explain that. That escapes me. Why? You'll have to ask the astronaut. So he's standing in a spotlight, which they didn't bring with them. Here's another thing about the Hasselblad cameras. Lundberg was asked, what protective measures did you do to protect the camera and the film against the harsh realities of being on the moon? Because now in the shade, it's minus 250 degrees, 250 degrees below zero. If you step into the sunlight, you are instantly in 275 degrees above, 275 degrees, because there's no atmosphere to protect you, to keep those temperatures from being extreme. So he said, all we did was we painted the camera silver. That was it. There was no lead protection. There was nothing to protect the film. Now the film, and he also said that, and this was his quote, they're not protected at all other than being painted silver. That might have had trouble if the film got too cold because it cracked. So Kodak film, at those temperatures, would crack.
Right.
And another thing, and the heat on the batteries would have killed the two batteries that advanced the film. It would have just killed them. And also the film would have melted. Also, there's radiation. Even on the moon, when you're walking on the moon and it clouds, it's full of radiation. And there's radiation coming from everywhere on the moon. There's nothing to keep the radiation from getting you. There's no protection at all from the radiation. And you know what radiation does to film? You ever take a picture and remember those pictures that you put them somewhere and you go back years later and they're faded?
Yep.
It's because of radiation. Just a little bit of radiation from what you're getting here with all the protection on our planet. So experts were asked about, they're given these pictures and they're asked, can you explain to us why these pictures are so crystal clear? And they're like, no. These should be completely fogged. The radiation should have fogged these images to be worthless. Yet none of them are fogged. They're all perfect. Another thing about the photographs is there were some mathematicians that actually did the math to figure out, could they have really taken as many pictures as they said they did? Now, in the book is also transcribed their logs everything they did while they were on the moon. So in that first mission, Apollo, and it's broken down for all the Apollo missions, by the way. So on Apollo 11, they were on the moon, their actual walking on the moon for 2 hours and 31 minutes. So 151 minutes. And they said they took 121 photographs while they were on the moon. So that breaks it down to Apollo 11. They would have had to taken a photograph every 15 seconds. And when you look at the logs of everything they were doing, they did not. They're doing all these they're collecting rocks and soil samples and planting flags and doing these other experiments that they wanted to do. They were not taking photographs. And he's got the math broken down in here for every Apollo mission. And all the photographs, there was not enough time to take the pictures on any Apollo mission. They said they did. So that's when I said, science doesn't lie, math doesn't lie. You can't spin that. And here's another thing about the photographic evidence. When they landed there's thrusters, a big thruster, and these astronauts they're like sitting on this thruster as they're coming down to make their landing. And they were going to land in a crater. They had to hand steer it to get past the crater to an open area. And if you were sitting on this rocket, it would have made so much noise in that where you couldn't hear them. But when you listen to the recording of them landing, there's no noise at all. It's just like me talking to you right now. Okay, I'm getting ready to land.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm almost landing. You hear nothing.
No.
Now, but they say, okay, there's a lot of dust being kicked up. It's obscuring our vision. They talk about the dust being kicked up. They land. Now, here's something that's really hard to explain. When you look at the photographs of the landing pads on the lunar module, they're gold foiled. There's not one speck of dust on those landing pads. Not on one of them. Not one speck of dust.
That's true.
Also, you would think there'd be a crater. And if you could take a leaf blower and you go out and you just go out to a rock or with dirt and turn it on high, you scatter right, and you can make a small indentation. You always will.
Yep.
Now, they landed on what was supposed to be this very billowy stuff flying everywhere. There is no crater under the moon. There's no burn mark under the moon. There's nothing. It looks like they just set this lunar module on there. But here's another thing that is really hard to explain. There are footprints in the photographs under the lunar module. Nobody walked under it.
And it never moved.
Nobody walked under it. It never moved. You can't explain that stuff.
That's incredible.
So, yeah. And let's see, is there anything else about that?
Well,
let me back up. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, too, some of the research that I was looking into that people are talking about, too, like with some of the photos, that like there's crosshairs in the photos.
Yes.
And that it seems like sometimes they're very prevalent. Sometimes they're almost behind what they're shooting.
Right. And that's broken down in this book as well. And that's brought up that's something the researchers cite is the crosshairs show up sporadically. They should be on every single photo and they should be very consistent where they show up. And they're not. Some they're not there. Some they're behind an object. Some they're in front of the object. Should not be that way. So they bring that up as well. And the other thing they bring up, go ahead.
I was just going to say real fast, too. And another thing that I thought I heard about was, I mean, we are all aware of the blurry footage that had been broadcast live around the world. But my understanding was that NASA had always said that there was a more of a pristine, really good quality recording of them on the moon as motion opposed to stills, but they had lost it, that it doesn't exist.
Oh, yeah. But they say they accidentally destroyed it.
Yeah,
they copied it over by using the tapes or something else. So think about that. This is the most iconic event in human history.
Right.
Most iconic event in human history. You would preserve every single thing that made this work because, I mean, there's nothing greater that's ever happened that you put a man on the moon and brought him back. And you would have preserved, if you had clear images, yes, you would have preserved that. That tape wouldn't have been just put in another VCR unit and taped over.
Yeah.
And here's another thing a lot of people don't know is that the images that the people saw were not live images coming directly from the moon. They had to be bounced to Earth, and I believe they had to be relayed into Australia. We had NASA people there. And they filmed, and this was bounced onto a TV camera, which degraded the picture even more.
Yep.
Then they filmed the TV camera, and then they sent that film out for everybody to watch.
Wow.
So you're watching a video looking at a TV screen, and you know, like when you film a screen, it's distorted a little bit. And you get, well, that's part of the reason why is nobody got to see the live footage for real. It was all, that's the way it was done. Then we'll get into more of that in a little bit. I'm trying to think if there's anything else about the photographs. Well, the video as well, like when they had the rover on future Apollo missions, they talk about, a lot of people cite that it would have been impossible when you see the rover driving around and you see the plumes of dust. Now, here's the thing. When you're on Earth, we have an atmosphere. Yeah. And when you see a dune buggy driving around kicking up dirt, it hits the atmosphere and it comes back down. Hits the atmosphere and falls. It only gets so high. It's called a rooster tail on the back of a wheel. So hits the atmosphere, down it goes. On the moon, with no atmosphere and very little, it's like 1/6 the gravitational pull of Earth, there was nothing to stop the dirt from floating up and just keep floating up and floating up and floating up. Right. Nothing to stop that, no atmosphere. Right. But when you watch the video of them riding on their lunar rover, and you see that rooster tail, it goes up. And even though they slowed it down for a slow motion video, and that's what researchers are citing, that they slow this down for slow motion, because when they speed it up 2 times, it looks just like if you're driving it on Earth. But you slow it 2 times down, and it looks like it's slow motion. But even in slow motion video, the rooster tail hits an atmosphere at the same height you would hit here on Earth, and it falls down. It didn't keep floating up. So they cite that. Another thing they cite in the video evidence is that if a man weighing like 160 pounds with his PLIS system, his backpack they wore and everything, he should be able to jump, so many feet high in the air. On Earth, with all that, you jump 18 inches. So there's video footage of an astronaut jumping up in the air to show how high he can jump on the moon. And mathematicians have done this, and it's all broken down in the book. They measured from the base of the ground to the top of his boot as he's jumping. And how high did he jump in reality? 18 inches. The same height he would have jumped had he done it here on Earth.
Wow.
So did they do that in a studio? If they did in a studio, then that makes sense. That's the outcome you would get.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's see, what else do we have about the photograph stuff here?
And we have about 2.5 minutes left. And one of the things too that's interesting about that is like you kind of alluded to earlier, that a lot of people believe that Stanley Kubrick was involved, especially with 2001: Space Odyssey.
Yes, they called Stanley Cooper's facility in England NASA East. And that's what the NASA people called it, because NASA had been instrumental in him getting 2001: Space Odyssey made. They worked with each other on that, and 2001: Space Odyssey came out the year before the Apollo landing took place. And what Kubrick did in the Apollo that film is he showed us what it should look like when a rocket blasts off. He showed us what it should look like with people moving in slow motion. He showed us what a moon landing should look like a year before it actually happened. And then when it actually happened, it very much mirrors what we saw in 2001: Space Odyssey. Now, there are scientists who have come forward and they have said that, first of all, with no gravity and no atmosphere on the moon, you should not be walking in slow motion. What is there to slow you down? You should be moving faster. But
right.
Yet it mimics what Kubrick did in 2001: Space Odyssey. There's a lot about him, but because I know we're running out of time, but I'll just tell you that people think that he put some clues in his movies indicating that he worked on the movie, because you couldn't tell anybody he did this.
Absolutely.
And remember the movie Wag the Dog?
Yeah.
This was like a real life Wag the Dog.
Yeah,
So
totally.
I'm gonna just give you, here's a couple of things in the movie The Shining that he did. Remember The Shining with Jack Nicholson?
Yeah.
So here's a couple of the clues that researchers think he put in. And when you add one by itself means nothing, but listen to this. There's a photo of a rocket launch on the refrigerator. Danny's the little boy. Danny's clothes are a combination of red, white, and blue throughout the film. In one scene, the American flag is hanging in reverse on the wall. Some researchers believe that's a statement that all was not right. The typewriter Jack uses is an underword Adler. The word Adler means eagle in German. The name to the Apollo 11 landing was Eagle. On the windowsill of the manager's office is the American flag and a gold bust of the American eagle, but not just any bust. It's the same design that was used for the Apollo 11 logo. Jack is throwing a ball against the wall that has a Native American symbol painted, which resembles the Saturn V rocket blasting off. And I'll just skip to the one I think was the really, really interesting. Danny, the little boy, is playing with his toys on the floor and arranges them so where it can be interpreted to look like a launch pad. He stands up. He's wearing a knitted sweater with a rocket on the front, and the rocket's blasting off, and the rocket is embroidered Apollo 11. We're gonna have all that's in that movie.
It's a lot. We're gonna have to leave it there because we're running out of time, and it really bums me out. But we're gonna have you back. We're gonna talk about murders. We're gonna be talking about spacesuits, or you call space costumes. A lot to talk about.
Yeah, some researchers.
Craig, take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
That was awesome. I hope you all enjoyed it. We'll be back tomorrow with Casey Constant. Take care, everybody.